For 2.5 centuries, America has prized its reputation as a global superpower, as the standard bearer for democracy, military might, and economic power. But 13 days into this second Trump administration, the velocity with which that reputation is evaporating around the world is alarming. America's credibility is at stake. President Donald Trump is ushering in an era of American leadership that is simply unserious. Now, that's not to say that the consequences of his actions are not deadly serious. It's to say that America is not behaving like a serious country. And that has been on display throughout the confirmation process for Trump's cabinet, the people who will lead the most powerful agencies in the country, and with that, the most powerful agencies in the world. Much has already been said about their qualifications or their mind-boggling lack thereof, but there is something to be said about the overall bizarre nature of some of these cabinet picks. It's the kind of stuff that would disqualify you from being the secretary of your local horticultural club, let alone some of the most influential positions in the country. There's Pete Hegseth, the former Fox News personality, an Army National Guard veteran who's been confirmed as Secretary of Defense despite a parade of controversies. Let's start small. Hegseth once admitted on live television that he hasn't washed his hands in 10 years. That's a weird flex, but okay. On a more serious note, Hegseth has been accused of drinking on the job. 10 current and former Fox employees told NBC News that Hegseth drank in ways that concerned his coworkers. Some said on some occasions they would smell alcohol on his breath before he went on air. A Trump transition official denied those allegations. During his confirmation hearing, Hegseth would not answer a yes or no question on whether he would resign as defense secretary if he were found to be drinking on the job. And there's been much concern about Hegseth's apparent treatment of women. In 2017, he was accused of sexual assault. He was never charged and says the encounter was consensual. He also says he was exonerated by the police who investigated the case. But exoneration is the official declaration of innocence after a legal process. That didn't happen here. Moving on to former South Dakota Governor Kristi Noem, who's been confirmed as Secretary of the Department of Homeland Security. When she was governor of South Dakota, she was actually banned from setting foot in about 12% of the very state which she governed. Last May, all 9 Native American tribes in South Dakota agreed to banish Noem from the tribal land after she made disparaging remarks about Native American parents and pushed claims that tribal leaders were profiting off of drug cartels. At least one tribe lifted Noem's ban ahead of her confirmation hearings. It's unclear if the other 8 tribes plan to do the same. The irony of the Secretary of Homeland Security barred from stepping foot on the American homeland. Noem also made headlines late last year when Trump was reportedly considering her for vice president. Right around the time she was auditioning for the role, she released a memoir, and in it, she does a little oversharing, revealing that she once shot and killed the family dog, Cricket, because the dog was untrainable and had an aggressive personality. Cricket was a 14-month-old puppy. And yes, she voluntarily disclosed this. You shouldn't shoot your dog, but if you do on purpose, you probably shouldn't tell a lot of people about it. Noem tried to reframe the narrative, by the way, saying her willingness to kill her own rambunctious puppy proves something serious about her, that she can make tough decisions. Needless to say, that didn't quite land. Believe it or not, Noem is not the only cabinet pick who has a weird dead animal story. Enter Robert F. Kennedy Jr. RFK Jr. is up for the role of Health and Human Services Secretary. It's never quite clear where to start with him. There are, in fact, a couple of animal stories. Do you want the dead bear in Central Park story or the brain-eating worm story? Last year, RFK Jr. revealed that back in 2010, doctors found what they believed to be a parasitic dead worm in his brain. Doctors told him the worm likely, quote, got into my brain and ate a portion of it and then died, end quote. Also maybe a story I wouldn't spread too widely. Another voluntary admission from last year had to do with a cold case in New York's Central Park. 10 years ago, the carcass of a bear cub was dumped in the park. It left police and the city stumped. How'd it get there? A decade later, RFK Jr. fessed up. In a video posted on X, he explained that when he was driving upstate when a car in front of him hit the bear. RFK then took the bear, the dead bear, and put it in his van with plans to save the meat in his refrigerator. Well, things get busy. One thing led to another. RFK got held up from getting home, somehow ended up in Manhattan with this whole extra dead bear in his car, so he dumped the bear in Central Park. One last story about RFK Jr. Recently, his cousin, Caroline Kennedy, wrote a letter to the Senate labeling RFK as a predator. In the long, scathing letter, she writes, quote, he enjoyed showing off how he put baby chickens and mice in a blender to feed his hawks. It was often a perverse scene of despair and violence, end quote. By the way, I haven't actually touched on the stuff that RFK could do that would actually jeopardize lives because he still appears to be a vaccine skeptic. The list of bizarre grievances against Trump's cabinet choices goes on. There's Kash Patel, the FBI pick who wants to dismantle the FBI, or Tulsi Gabbard, the pick for Director of National Intelligence, who's defended some of our biggest foreign adversaries and thinks the U.S. and NATO might be to blame for Russia's invasion of Ukraine. These are the people who are likely going to represent the United States on the world stage for the next 4 years. I mean, if this was written as an episode of Veep or The Office, the producers would turn it down for being too unbelievable. And like I said, there are actual concerns beside a lack of hygiene and a brainworm about these candidates and their fitness for their roles, concerns of the life and death variety that we've covered extensively on this show. But it doesn't matter, because despite the mountain of evidence that these nominees are not remotely qualified for their jobs, most have already been confirmed or are on their way to being confirmed. What does matter is how the world views America. From the outside looking in, we are becoming more of a laughingstock by the hour. It makes you wonder how our allies, or more crucially, our enemies, can possibly take this administration seriously. And if the other world leaders aren't laughing, they might be crying or screaming, worried about what another America First Trump presidency could bring. Last year, before Trump was reelected, Jackie Combs with the Los Angeles Times wrote, quote, they don't respect Trump at all, though they do fear him, the way you'd fear a madman at a nuclear button. President Nixon sought leverage by making foreign counterparts think he was unstable. Trump actually is unstable. Foreign diplomats and some leaders don't even mask their anxiety, end quote. As a trusted global partner, all you have is your reputation, and it starts right at the top. Joining me now, Ravi Agarwal, editor-in-chief of Foreign Policy and the host of FP Live, and Mehdi Hasan, an award-winning journalist and CEO and editor-in-chief of Zeteo. Gentlemen, good to see you both this morning. Mehdi, let's start about this. I don't know what's a bigger concern, the fear that our allies have, including Canada and Mexico now, where we've started a trade war, or the danger that our enemies see us as weak and disorderly and disorganized.
Not just our enemies, Ali, and that's the problem. Good morning to you, by the way. It's not just our enemies, right? If it was just our enemies, it'd be like, okay, who cares about your enemies and your adversaries? Play your madman strategy. It's the idea of jeopardizing alliances, right? The U.S. is its alliances. The U.S. abroad, the strength of it comes from its reputation, from its ability to persuade and get other people to come along with it. Picking fights with your allies. I mean, I was the guy, Ali, as you know, who was warning about, look, Trump is not a dove. If he comes back into office, we're at risk of greater conflict. Are they going to have a war with Iran? He's put a bunch of hawks in his cabinet like Hegseth and Rubio. I didn't know I'd be the guy going on television like I am now saying, hey, I'm worried about a war with Denmark. I'm worried about a war with Panama. I'm worried about a war with Canada. I mean, the EU, you think I'm joking, the EU military chief, just for your viewers to be aware of this, the European Union's military chief said about a week ago, maybe we should put EU troops on Greenland. For the Russians? No, for us, for the Americans. That's insane, right? And you said allies. Canada sacrificed 165 people in Afghanistan to fight alongside the U.S. after 9/11. You're picking fights with Canada and Mexico. This is a great moment for China, the country that Trump thinks is the big enemy and he's going to crack down. If I'm the Chinese, I'm loving this moment. I'm calling up the Colombians, where he just picked a 24-hour trade war. I'm calling up all these countries in Latin America and Asia and Africa and saying, can you really trust the United States?
Yeah, no, and this is an important point to get to, Ravi, because there is opportunity for other people. If you always thought America was the solid ally, if you didn't doubt that your treaty, I mean, the USMCA, the treaty between Canada, Mexico, and Canada, followed NAFTA, which followed the free trade agreement between Canada and the U.S., which followed the Auto Pact. This is decades in the making, hard-won allies and alliances and trade negotiations. If that's not worth the paper it's written on, what exactly is?
I mean, this is not a new world order. This is a new world disorder. Trump is basically blowing up the last 80 years of the rules-based international system. You can argue that much of it wasn't working for a lot of countries, but this response to absolutely tear it apart is a whole other deal. I mean, Mehdi just referred to American allies, so the likes of Canada, Mexico, Colombia, all of the EU. They really must be thinking now, with a friend like America, Who needs enemies? And, it's worth remembering the only time NATO's Article 5 has been invoked was to defend the United States after 9/11. But if you think of the world as divided into camps, you've got the allies, you've got the disruptors, for example, Russia, Iran, North Korea. I mean, they're looking at this moment and saying Trump is doing exactly what we need him to do. He's disrupting the very system that made America strong. But there are two other camps I'd like to mention very quickly. There's the opportunists, referred to that, India, Saudi Arabia, many countries in the global south. They see a lot of opportunities that they can cherry pick in a quid pro quo world. Ali, the thing I worry about the most is this fourth category of countries, smaller countries. If you're Sri Lanka, Somalia, Chad, good luck. I mean, the old system worked, flawed as it was, because it was a rising tide that tried to lift all boats. If you blow up that system, which is what trade and globalization and supply chains all over the world are built around, the biggest losers are the smallest countries. And it really seems that America first doesn't care about that.
This is an interesting point, Mehdi, because I think Ravi points out there are a lot of things about the 80-year-old world order that we're in that were not perfect, that didn't work, that were not entirely fair, and worthy of discussion and some degree of disruption. But that doesn't feel like what Donald Trump's doing. Donald Trump doesn't feel like I'm coming in to be a reformer, to actually improve on some of these things that are broken. It feels like it's really just breaking the China itself. And part of this is our position on foreign aid that seems to be, I don't even know what it is right now. Some foreign aid seems to be frozen. There's some websites that are not working. I don't even know where we are in the world of foreign aid at the moment.
So, Ali, a couple of things. One is, on the burn it down, you're 100% right. And that applies at home and abroad, right? There are people who voted for Trump at home because they legitimately did not like the system in Washington, D.C. They thought we have a corrupt political order. He'll burn it down. As you say, though, he's not a builder. He's a guy who just continues the chaos. Same abroad. A lot of us were very unhappy with the Biden administration's Middle East policies. I just came back from the Gulf, where they all think Trump is going to be better than Biden because Biden was so bad on Palestine and the rules-based order. But, of course, we know he won't be better. He's actually saying, let's clean out Gaza. He wants to make things worse. He does destroy things, not build things, despite pretending to be a builder. On the aid front, I'm so glad you raised that, Ali. I hope the viewers at home understand what is going on right now. We are in a massive, massive crisis, humanitarian crisis, which Trump has inflicted, a man-made crisis. He just flicked a switch and said no more aid overnight. And overnight, Ali, in places like Sudan, soup kitchens shut down. In Ukraine, people lost fuel and electricity. In Thailand, they turned away Myanmar war refugees from hospitals. In Cambodia, they shut down an anti-malarial program. People are talking about, ProPublica did a very good investigation pointing out that around 130,000 children in Africa may now be at risk of HIV, being born with HIV because their mothers have been cut off from HIV drugs under George W. Bush's PEPFAR program. That's all been shuttered by Marco Rubio and Donald Trump. It should be one of the biggest stories in America, if not the world. People are going to die because of what Donald Trump and Musk and Rubio have been doing in recent weeks. And also, if you don't have any moral concerns for these people dying, again, to go back to Ravi's point, your point, what does it say for America's reputation in the world? One of the few good things we had on the international stage was our foreign aid program.
In fact, I heard from a Canadian official, Ravi, who said if this moves forward, whatever happens, whatever comes of what looks like a renegotiation of our trade agreements with Mexico and Canada, whether you think it'll be better or worse, it has done such irreparable damage to some of the deepest relationships that the world understood existed. Mehdi makes the point. Canadians, when America goes to war, Canadians go to war with them to help. This has done irreparable damage that may be generational.
Absolutely. I mean, look, and it was one thing in the first term where, many could argue this is a blip. America will sort of somehow correct itself. But this time it really doesn't feel that way. I mean, other leaders around the world, they really get the sense that this is the new American normal. This is what American people want again. And there's a sense that there's a sort of drunkenness over hard power and the way in which it can be wielded and used and deployed around the world, maybe in the short term to help American interests or however you define American interests. But what about soft power? And I think to throw the baby out with the bathwater in terms of whether it's aid, in terms of whether it's, America's human rights record, flawed as it is, we can all agree with that, but at least the intention was often to try and do better. The rhetoric around democracy promotion, again, incredibly flawed as it was, misused in many ways, think of the Iraq War, but again, aspiring to do something better. When you throw all of that away, it really raises the question, what do you stand for other than an exertion of hard power? And then look at it this way, if you ever are in trouble, who stands up for you? What rules still remain and exist that could defend you, that could create a system that you could fall back on? All of that, much as though Trump's supporters in this current moment may be celebrating some of his moves, may be looking at how Colombia was forced to capitulate and may see that as a victory. But longer term, when those receipts come in, they could be costly.
Guys, thanks very much for this conversation. Ravi Agarwal is editor-in-chief of Foreign Policy. Mehdi Hasan is the CEO and editor-in-chief of Zeteo.